This morning, coronavirus now classified as a public health emergency, prompting drastic new measures.
Beginning at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Sunday, February the 2nd, the United States government will implement temporary measures to increase our abilities
In August, it's about 71% now fully vaccinated, all residents, and that means about 1 million more doses since we put the mandates in place.
School of Public Health says the homemade cotton masks only stop about 2% of the airflow coming in. 2%.
He said he didn't tell us or give people a warning of it because he didn't want to panic the American people. You don't panic, he panicked.
Today I am officially declaring a national emergency. Two very big words.
It's been nearly 3 years since the emergence of COVID-19, the harmless but deadly, political but not political, world-stopping but world-saving virus? To be honest, it's hard to find two people that completely agree on what COVID was.
So in your own words, what was the COVID-19 pandemic?
Disruption.
It was an eye-opener.
Stressful in one word.
National security concern.
The pandemic was an ecological response to global warming.
I wouldn't say preventable. It could have been handled better, and it was chaotic and strange.
And what is it that hinders Americans from coming to a singular consensus? My theory is narratives. America has run on a very particular narrative for decades, and when new narratives arrived on the back of the pandemic, it caused a clash in responses. Let's take a dive into the narratives that dominate America and their power during the pandemic.
Tell us about the divisions in American society that you've identified for your book, because they're fascinating. I know they're not hard and fast. There are some who might drift from one into another, but you've come up with this kind of groupings of Americans that is genuinely helpful. Go through it.
In his novel, Last Best Hope, George Packer lays out 4 narratives that dominate American society. But it's the first one that I find most particularly interesting. The first narrative Packer speaks on is Free America, which he heralds as the most politically powerful of the 4. Free America holds the values of personal and professional freedom. It values a free economy and minimal government interference. It is a narrative that puts power on the individual. America was born from this fierce belief in personal autonomy. When English settlers came to America, often to escape persecution in their homeland, and built communities from the ground up, they also built a culture around their shared collective of rugged individualism. And when this autonomy was threatened by the current power structure, they overthrew it to protect the free-spirited society that they had labored so hard for. This personal value of I do me and you don't impede has remained a staple in American society. And unlike the Eastern practices of big families and communal living, statistics show that time and time again, Americans prefer to forge their own path and are encouraged by society that rewards that independence. So what happens when a society that's never even had to consider their next door neighbor are now implored to take on the interest of the herd?
During the pandemic, we also identified more vulnerable groups to COVID, such as the elderly and those with chronic diseases. You're a younger person, so you probably don't count as the vulnerable group. So how responsible did you feel for the well-being of more vulnerable populations?
Well, don't ask me about vulnerability. I'm going to sound like
I don't even know I don't know how to phrase it in a polite way.
Are you asking me like how responsible I felt in doing things myself? Oh, I was protecting myself all the time.
No, responsible for the people, the vulnerable people.
How I'm supposed to feel.
It's how you feel. It's not how you're supposed to feel. It's
how I feel.
Yeah.
How I feeling.
Yeah.
I feel like they tried to place it on young adults or even kids to keep safe.
Yes.
Even though I was less likely to, they're the elderly and I have a chronic illness, but I don't know. I felt I'm doing everything that I can to keep myself, my family, and other people safe.
I don't think we were responsible. I think that's like, I'm trying to think of how else to, but I really don't think it was up to us. I mean, we're not the ones that are in the medical field. We haven't researched it. We're just as fresh to the virus as a lot of adults.
When you talk about community health, it has to be inclusive or else you haven't achieved anything, right? So this had to be a community effort to, unfortunately, we never made it to herd immunity, right? Because there wasn't enough people who were getting vaccinated quick enough to overcome being susceptible to future strains of COVID.
I definitely took it serious. I definitely wore my mask. I got the shot when it first came out. I think that we need to all have that sense of responsibility and accountability, not just for ourselves, but for one another.
There's family here in town that are senior citizens that I didn't see for almost a year because I felt like going around them could put them at risk potentially. And so I didn't. So, I mean, I think that we all had to play our part in that responsibility.
Why did you think some others may have not felt that responsibility for the more vulnerable populations?
A sense of entitlement, right? Not understanding the collective.
Not a herd like we were back in the 60s and 70s where people just did what the government said we should do. Like, polio vaccines, the consequences, especially for children, were extremely dire if you got polio. And so everybody went and got vaccinated. There wasn't a question as to, whether you trusted the vaccine or not.
To compare it, after 9/11, people were definitely more patriotic, right? They wanted to join the war and fight for the American dream, right? This idea of democracy. But that came from the top. It came from the president. The president, during that time, Bush had speeches that were geared towards coming together in unity and fighting this war against terrorism. Well, that same thing can be put towards COVID, right? There was no unity. There was no trust. And it all comes from the top.
I mentioned a second, more political aspect of Free America, and that is the claustrophobia Americans feel for big governments. In the average American's mind, more government equals less individual freedom. But there's also a risk of mishandlement. The 1970s was a political turning point for America. Amongst the Pentagon Papers, Watergate, and the economic crash, trust in the government tanked. We haven't necessarily gained back that trust. In fact, 2020 was already riddled with disappointment in government structures on both sides of the political spectrum. So how did that mistrust present itself through the pandemic?
I think that was the main factor in how people perceived the messaging that was coming out of the CDC. Because instead of having the backing of our political leaders, the scientists, they were trying to change the narrative to make it appear that the government had more control over the pandemic than they actually did.
Like, being a politician, on no matter what side, you're gonna leave some information out. You're gonna put a front on to show what other people want to see. That's just the whole thing about being a politician. Being a politician is like being an actor.
And why do you think people started losing trust in the CDC?
Inconsistent information. You were getting consistent information from leads like Dr. Fauci and other medical experts, but the CDC's information, it was largely inconsistent from how long to wear a mask, when to wear a mask, when to start, and even when the vaccines came out, when to get vaccinated.
Did you experience any of this distrust yourself? And do you think that any of that reflected on how you reacted to the pandemic?
No. I don't have that level of distrust because, again, in my profession, I've actually worked with government agencies. So,
once again, it's about trusting the information. Don't get so caught up on the person that you forget about the institution, right? And the CDC is put there for a reason. It's been there way before COVID-19, and we've trusted up to this point, even going back to Ebola with Obama. So we've trusted to that point, so we need to trust it now.
And of course, we can't forget that with people of color, that distrust is felt on an even deeper level.
Did I feel any distrust in my government? Of course I did. Of course I did. Looking at who was president at the time, of course I had distrust. Looking at the amount of hate crimes spiked during the ending of his presidency, of course I had mistrust. I had mistrust since 2016 when he was elected. Yes. Yes.
As a Black woman, going to like see any doctor and any health, we're always undermined, we're always underlooked. We always think that, oh, because our significance are not that important of other people, so we're always looking down on. We're always, people come in thinking, oh, we're just looking for the next fix. Or
people don't feel as though they've had a voice in government, you know, an equitable voice in government, and that I think there's a lot of people in the U.S. who feel disenchanted, that feel that the government is not doing things in their best interests.
I would like to say I'm pretty fortunate. I don't have to think about this myself, but I think for other people and people who are in like the less richer neighborhoods, the less more in poverty, they are going to have harder access to get it from. But when CVS started giving out free vaccines and free boosters, I was like, okay, this is getting better. This is how it's going to focus, and like everyone's going to be accessible to it.
Honestly, from an internal view of all of this, there were a lot of efforts to get the vaccine out first to vulnerable communities and to impoverished communities. And of course, vulnerable populations like the elderly, but there was really a big push to make them the first. Unfortunately, making them the first made some communities feel like, oh, you're going to try this out on us, right?
And known about a lot more people of other races dying than us, but they kept telling us it's us. And they kept, if you look at the commercials, they kept pushing. They never pushed for any other race I didn't see, at least in my area. Did not push for anyone that's white or Asian. Go get your shots, go get this. But they have so many Black people. Go get your shots. And they got Black people on commercials. They're smiling, and you know, like you're like it's you know, it's like they're doing this, and it's like, are you guys? Do you think we're stupid, or like we're paying it? Like why would you pitch so hard to give it to one race when we have an entire world? When we're the ones that are being, you know, people are, not everyone, but we have some prejudiced people that's trying to suppress us and keep us down. Why all of a sudden switch and try to help us? That's why those questions, you know, arise, and that's why there's no trust. It's like, why you literally just killed George Floyd and you want me to take your shot? What, like, don't.
Like in the Black community, there's always going to be, you know, like mistrust and or distrust in the government because of how they've treated the Black community for so long. And I feel like Black people have the right to feel however they want about the vaccines. Me, I believe in science. I do genuinely think that, you know, science is here to help us. I understand why people wouldn't trust the vaccine at first, but after a couple of months or a couple of weeks, really, no, it was like a month or two, I felt like we should get them.
So amongst all these narratives, which one is correct? Yeah, in a project about conflicting narratives, it seems counterproductive to just add another one. And as you can see, I spent many minutes in front of my camera trying to formulate a decent conclusion about what I wanted people to take out this project, but to be honest, it's the power of narrative itself, and those who hold power of the narrative, such as the media. COVID is a great case study on how the media can unite, divide, uplift, discourage, educate, and mislead. And as upcoming media professionals, we have to be aware of the power that we have in controlling the narrative.
Thank you, Raji.